have programmed our bot to write all of the data for our state into our CSV file, we want to use our nCount variable to identify our last row. The last row of data is not simply our nCount value that we get after running the bot. The simplified CSV file example will help clarify why the nCount variable does not identify the last row. Remember, our nCount variable does not start counting until we write the data into the CSV file. In other words, our nCount variable skips the header row. Because the nCount variable skips the header row, the nCount variable is always one less than the number of rows that have values written into the CSV file. The problem of the nCount variable becomes clear when we think about how we would write our summing formula. We want to enter a formula to sum the columns. And because we don't know how many lines of data were going to be written into our CSV file, we want to allow the final number to vary. We could do this by programming the bot to pull the nCount variable into our formula, so that whatever the nCount variable value is at the end of our bot program, that number will be put into our formula. If we use the nCount variable, however, which does not adjust for the header row, then our column sum formula will miss the last row of data. So in this case, our total quantity would be 36 instead of 54. To overcome the header row, we can create a string variable titled sLastRow that adds 1 to the final nCount variable value. In taking this approach, our bot will appropriately sum all 3 rows of data because the sum will move from row 2 down to row 4. Before I show you the steps to create the last row variable, I just want to caution you. If you don't account for a header row, then you can miss rows of data when you use Excel formulas. If, however, you overcorrect for a header row, you can end up with a circular reference formula error. Thus, if your formulas in the CSV file are not producing the values you want or provides you with a circular reference error, check to make sure that you have appropriately specified your starting row in the formula and the last row formula to correct for any differences in the way your bot program runs. To identify our last row and assign it to a sLastRow variable, we are going to follow these steps. We will stay on the Numbers menu and use the toString action. We do not want the bot to identify a last row until all of the rows of data have been written into our CSV file. Therefore, we need the toString action to appear outside of the if statement and outside of the loop statement. Our last row variable is going to start with our nCount variable. We then increase our nCount variable by 1 to take account of the header row. Finally, we're going to assign the output to a string variable titled sLastRow. Let's get into A2019 to see how to identify our last row and assign it to our sLastRow variable. Since we stayed on the Number menu, we can double-click on toString to move the action onto our workbench. You can click and drag the action so that it appears both outside the loop and outside the if statement. Just like we could assign a string variable to a numeric variable, we can assign a numeric variable to a string variable. The advantage to using the toString action is that we can perform mathematical operations on our numeric variable before assigning it to a string variable. To configure the string action, we are first going to tell the bot to start with the nCount variable. Click on the X in the parens and choose the nCount variable from your list and click Yes, Insert. Next, we want to perform our mathematical operation. In the Enter a Number box, type plus and then the number 1. Since we have placed the toString action outside of our loop and outside of our if statement, we are instructing the bot to pull the last endCount variable and add 1 to that endCount variable. The next option allows us to identify the precision of the number before converting the number into a string variable. Since Excel only interprets rows as whole numbers, for example 132, not 132.00, we want there to be no digits after the decimal point. Therefore, keep the default at 0. Finally, we can assign the output from this formula to a string variable. Click on the down arrow and select S last row from the list. We can then click Save, and we can close our number menu.